I never expected that putting up a simple no parking sign would ignite a full-blown war with my neighborhood HOA and their entitled president. How was I supposed to know that towing their cars would expose a year-long web of lies and finally bring justice to our entire business district? I slammed on my brakes, nearly hitting the silver Lexus parked in my reserved spot. 3 strange cars filled our company's small lot, and my blood pressure shot through the roof. After 5 years running my web design business in this building, I'd never seen this before. What the heck? I muttered, circling the lot twice before giving up and parking on the street. I'd have to feed a meter all day, which wasn't how I planned to start my Monday. My office manager, Sophie, was already inside, looking annoyed. There's nowhere for anyone to park. Liam and Emma are circling the block. I dropped my laptop bag on my desk and stared out the window at the unfamiliar vehicles. Any idea whose cars these are? No clue, Sophie said, handing me coffee. But there's a property management sign over by the fence. Maybe call them. The sign belonged to Evergreen Property Management. When I called, a bored-sounding receptionist connected me to someone named Doug. Oh, that would be Pinecrest Gardens, Doug said when I described the situation. They're repaving their visitor parking area this week, and they're using your lot because the HOA board told residents they could park there temporarily. He replied like this was perfectly normal. My jaw tightened. Nobody asked my permission. That's strange. Let me check something. I heard keyboard clicking. According to our notes, Helen Carter, the HOA president, said she had an arrangement with the business owner. I am the business owner, I said, my voice rising. There's no arrangement. After a useless conversation where Doug promised to look into it, I printed some polite notes. This is private property for XYZ Design employees only. Please find alternative parking. Thank you for understanding. I placed one under each windshield wiper. By lunchtime, my team was grumbling about their parking tickets. I promised to reimburse them, which would cost me nearly $200 for the day. Maybe we should just tow them, Liam suggested, biting into his sandwich. Let's try the nice approach first, I said, though my patience was wearing thin. The next morning was worse. Not 3, but 7 cars with Pinecrest Gardens permit stickers filled our lot. My notes from yesterday were crumpled on the ground. One had a handwritten response. The HOA said, "This is okay." I found Pinecrest Gardens easily, a gated community of luxury townhomes adjacent to our commercial building. The security guard at the entrance wouldn't let me in without an appointment, but gave me Helen Carter's number after I explained the situation. "I'll be in meetings all day," she said when I called. "Can this wait?" "No," I replied firmly. "Your residents are taking private parking spaces my business needs. We had clients cancel appointments yesterday because they couldn't find parking." She sighed dramatically. "Fine, I can give you 10 minutes at 3:30. I spent the day researching parking laws and property boundaries while my employees worked from home. Our deed clearly showed the parking lot belonged exclusively to our building. At 3:25, I arrived at the community clubhouse, armed with documents. Helen Carter looked exactly how I'd imagined. Mid-50s, expensive blonde highlights, designer outfit, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I understand there's some confusion about parking," she said, her voice haughty. "No confusion," I replied. "Your residents are parking in my private lot without permission." She tilted her head. "You need to understand our situation. Our community has 78 homes. During this repaving project, we have nowhere for visitors to park." "That sounds like a planning problem on your part," I said. "My business is suffering because your lot is half empty most days," she interrupted. "We've been watching. Surely you can accommodate us temporarily. We're neighbors after all." The fact they'd been watching my property made my skin crawl. "How long isn't temporarily?" 3 weeks, she replied. "The contractor estimates 3 weeks for the entire project." I took a deep breath. That's completely unreasonable. I can't have my employees and clients fighting for spaces for 3 weeks. "Well," she said, leaning forward, "the previous building owner allowed us to use the lot occasionally. We were simply continuing that arrangement." This was the first I'd heard of any agreement. I'd bought the building 2 years ago, and nothing like this was mentioned during the sale. "Show me the agreement," I challenged. Helen shuffled some papers on her desk. "I don't have it on hand, but I assure you it exists. After 10 minutes of back and forth, I reluctantly agreed to let them use 5 spots for 1 week only. I'd mark them clearly, with signs. Helen smiled like she'd won something, which made me uneasy. "I'll communicate this to the residents," she said, standing to end our meeting. As I left, I noticed the construction crew by the visitor parking area. From the size of the job, there was no way it would be finished in 1 week. That night, I drafted a formal letter documenting our agreement, 5 spots for 1 week. I emailed it to Helen and the property management company. The response came immediately. "Thanks for your cooperation during this challenging time for our community." Something told me this wouldn't be the end of it. The next morning confirmed my fears. I arrived early, coffee in hand, hoping to see improvement. Instead, I counted 15 cars with HOA permits. They'd taken every single space, including my reserved spot marked owner. My phone buzzed with messages from employees who couldn't park. Clients would start arriving in an hour. I tried being reasonable, but Helen Carter had taken advantage of my goodwill. Now I had a decision to make: back down or fight back. Either way, this parking dispute was about to get much more complicated. Absolutely unacceptable. I paced the sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear, while a stream of my employees arrived, circled the full lot, and left to find street parking. "We had an agreement, Helen. 5 spots for 1 week. I communicated exactly what we discussed." She replied calmly. "Perhaps some residents misunderstood. 15 cars isn't a misunderstanding. It's a complete disregard for our agreement. I'm hosting the garden committee right now," Helen said, voices murmuring in the background. "Can we discuss this later?" "No," I insisted. "I need those cars moved immediately." She sighed into the phone. "You're overreacting. It's just parking. It's not just parking. It's my property and my business that's suffering." "Well," she paused, her tone shifting. "Technically, there's nothing you can do. As I mentioned, the previous owner granted us occasional parking rights years ago." I felt my face growing hot. "Show me this supposed agreement." "I'll have our secretary scan it when she's in tomorrow," Helen replied. "In the meantime, please try to be neighborly." The call ended, and I stood fuming on the sidewalk. Sophie approached with a stack of cancelled appointment notices from our scheduling system. 4 clients couldn't find parking and left, she said. 2 more rescheduled for next week. I made a quick decision. Call everyone. We're working remotely today. That evening, I visited the county records office. The clerk helped me search property documents related to my building. After an hour, we found nothing about parking agreements with Pinecrest Gardens or any HOA. Next, I tracked down the previous owner, Mr. Bennett, now retired in Florida. When I explained the situation, he laughed. "That Helen tried the same thing with me," he said. "The HOA wanted an easement for overflow parking during their community events. I refused. There was never any agreement. She claims there's a document," I told him. "She's bluffing," he replied. "I owned that building for 22 years and never signed anything like that." Armed with this information, I contacted 3 towing companies before finding one willing to handle the situation. They explained the legal requirements. Proper signage needed to be posted 24 hours before towing could begin. I ordered signs immediately. Private property. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. The towing company installed them that night at each entrance to the lot. Next, I emailed Helen. I verified with the previous owner and county records that no parking agreement exists between my property and Pinecrest Gardens HOA. Unauthorized vehicles in our lot will be towed beginning Wednesday morning. Please inform your residents immediately. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "You're making a serious mistake," Helen said, her sweet tone replaced by cold anger. "We have legal standing. Produce the document then," I challenged. "I don't appreciate your hostile approach to a simple neighborly matter," she deflected. "Our residents will be very upset. They should be upset with you for misleading them," I replied. "You told them they could park on private property without permission." "I'm on the City Planning Commission," she said, her voice lowering. "Making enemies with me could complicate things for your business in the future." The threat was clear. I took a deep breath before responding. "Are you threatening me, Helen? Because that would be unfortunate, especially if I needed to report such threats to the Ethics Committee." Silence hung on the line for several seconds. "You've declared war on the wrong person," she finally said. Expect to hear from our attorney. No attorney called that day or the next. Instead, I received a flood of angry emails from Pinecrest residents, clearly orchestrated by Helen. Each one followed the same pattern, calling me unreasonable, demanding I honor the long-standing agreement, and threatening various consequences. I sent a single reply, all response. I sympathize with your parking situation. However, no agreement exists. I verified this with county records and the previous owner. Your HOA president misled you. Please make alternative arrangements, as towing begins tomorrow morning. That night, I barely slept. Would I arrive to slash tires, broken windows? As a small business owner, I couldn't afford a prolonged conflict with wealthy neighbors, but I also couldn't let Helen Carter bully me out of my own property. I arrived before dawn on Wednesday and parked on the street, wanting a clear view of what would happen. The towing company sent 3 trucks, positioned strategically out of sight. At 7:45 a.m., the first Pinecrest resident arrived, a man in scrubs clearly heading to work. He parked in my lot despite the prominent signs, looked around nervously, then hurried away. Others followed, a woman in a business suit, an elderly gentleman, a young mum dropping off kids at the car next to hers. By 8:30, 12 spaces were filled with unauthorized vehicles. My employees arrived and parked on the street per my instructions. At precisely 9:00, the towing operation began. The efficiency was impressive. Within 45 minutes, all 12 vehicles were gone, replaced by my employees' cars. My phone exploded with calls. I let them go to voicemail. Email notifications flooded my screen. Angry residents. Helen, the property management company. Looking through the window, I watched Helen's luxury SUV screech into the now empty lot around 10:00 a.m. She stormed toward my building, designer handbag swinging wildly from her arm. The front desk buzzed. Helen Carter is here, demanding to see you. She's quite upset. I straightened my shirt and took another deep breath. Send her in. Helen burst through my office door, face flushed with anger. You had no right. I had every right, I replied calmly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Please sit down. Do you have any idea what you've done? She remained standing, voice echoing through the office. Doctor, ahead. Reynolds missed an emergency surgery. Elaine Matthews missed her chemo appointment. People's cars are being held hostage because of your pettiness. I maintained my composure. That's unfortunate, but not my responsibility. You told your residents they could park here despite knowing there was no agreement. There is an agreement, she insisted. Then produce it, I challenged again. Because I've checked county records, and I've spoken with Mr. Bennett. But he confirmed he never signed anything. Something flickered across Helen's face, the first hint of doubt. Furthermore, I continued, sliding a folder across the desk. Here's my property survey showing clear boundaries, the deed without any easements or encumbrances related to parking, and statements from neighboring businesses who've had similar issues with Pinecrest residents taking their parking. Helen remained silent, not touching the folder. I also have recordings of our conversations where you implied you could make things difficult for my business through your position on the planning commission, the first said. This was a bluff. I hadn't recorded our calls, but her reaction would tell me volumes. Her face paled. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, I replied. And it's highly unethical. The power dynamic had shifted. Helen slowly sank into the chair, her bluster fading. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you to tell your residents the truth, that you misled them about having permission to park here. I want a formal acknowledgement from the HOA board that no parking agreement exists, and I want no further harassment of my business. Helen's eyes narrowed, calculating her options. Outside my office window, another resident arrived, saw the empty lot, and sped away in frustration. The board meets tonight, she said finally. I'll discuss the situation with them. As she stood to leave, I added one more thing. Helen, if I see another Pinecrest resident parking here without permission, I'll be contacting the ethics committee about your threats. She didn't respond, simply walked out with significantly less confidence than when she'd entered. I wondered if this was truly the end, or merely the calm before an even bigger storm. Either way, I wasn't backing down. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they start with something as simple as a parking space. Helen's garden committee meeting was in full swing when I walked onto her perfectly manicured lawn. 6 women in matching sun hats stopped their chatter and stared at me like I was a bug that had crawled into their tea. "Excuse me, Helen, but we need to talk right now," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I hadn't expected an audience, but maybe this was better witnesses. Helen's smile didn't reach her eyes as she stood up. "Ladies, this is our neighbor who runs that little computer repair shop next door. My company developed software, but I didn't bother correcting her. What seems to be the problem now?" she asked with fake sweetness. "There are 15 cars with HOA permits in my lot today," I said, pulling out my phone to show her the photos I'd taken. "We agreed on 5 spots for 1 week. My entire staff had to park 3 blocks away in the hot sun." One of the committee members, a woman with short grey hair, leaned forward. "Is this about the parking situation, Helen? I thought you said he was happy to help." Helen waved her hand dismissively. "You're overreacting," she said to me. "It's just parking. We're in the middle of a major community improvement project. You violated our agreement," I insisted, feeling my face grow hot. "My business is suffering. Clients can't find parking. My employees are late returning from lunch because they have to walk so far." Helen's smile hardened as she glanced at her friends. "Well," she smirked, leaning in slightly, "technically, there's nothing you can do. The previous owner of your building granted us occasional parking rights years ago. It's in our HOA records." The grey-haired woman nodded. "Yes, I remember that agreement back when Dr. Johnson owned that medical building." My stomach dropped. Could this be true? Had I bought property with some strange parking easement? No, my lawyer would have caught that during the purchase. "I'd like to see this agreement," I said firmly. Helen's smile widened. "Of course. I'll have our secretary email it to you. Ladies, shall we continue our meeting? The flower competition won't judge itself." I left feeling defeated and confused. On the drive back to my office, I called my real estate attorney, who promised to look into it right away. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my empty office, staring at an email from my lawyer. The agreement Helen claimed existed was actually a proposal that Dr. Johnson had explicitly rejected 15 years ago. The HOA had approached him about overflow parking during their annual community festival, and he had said no in writing. There was never any agreement. My hands trembled as I dialed the number of a towing company recommended by the strip mall owner across the street. "Blue Sky Towing. How can we help you?" "I need to have unauthorized vehicles removed from private property," I explained. "How quickly can you put up signs?" "We can have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon," the dispatcher said, "but you'll need proper signage for at least 24 hours before we can tow legal requirement." "That's fine," I replied. "And how early can you start towing after that?" "We open at 6:00 a.m. Our drivers can be there first thing Thursday morning if that works for you." Wednesday morning, I arrived extra early to supervise the installation of large red and white signs at every entrance to our parking lot, private property. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. I also had the towing company put up their specific signs with their contact information, as required by law. The reaction was immediate. A silver-haired man in a golf shirt approached me as I was taking photos of the newly installed signs for my records. "What's all this about?" he demanded. "We've been parking here for the repaving." I tried to stay calm. "I'm sorry, but this is private property. It belongs to my business. The HOA never had permission to use it." But Helen said. Helen was wrong. I cut in, surprising myself with my firmness. She claimed there was an old agreement, but there never was one. I verified this with my attorney. The man frowned, then took a photo of the sign with his phone. "This is going to be a problem," he muttered before walking away. By lunchtime, my office phone was ringing non-stop with angry HOA residents. I had my receptionist take messages, but I didn't return the calls. Instead, I sent a single email to the entire HOA board to whom it may concern. "It has come to my attention that HOA residents were incorrectly told they could park in my company's private lot. This information was false. No such agreement has ever existed. Effective immediately, only authorized vehicles belonging to my business, its employees, and customers may park in our lot. All unauthorized vehicles will be towed at the owner's expense starting Thursday morning." I have attached documentation proving that the supposed agreement was actually rejected by the previous owner. At 5:30 p.m., as I was preparing to leave for the day, my phone rang. It was Helen. "You can't do this," she hissed without even saying hello. "Do you know how much trouble you're causing? Our residents have nowhere to park." "That sounds like a planning problem the HOA should have solved before starting construction," I replied calmly. "Not my issue. Listen to me." Her voice dropped lower, more threatening. "You don't want to make an enemy of me. I'm on the City Planning Commission. One word from me, and your next permit application will mysteriously vanish." A chill ran down my spine, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Was she really threatening me? I hit the record button on my phone. "Are you threatening to abuse your position on the Planning Commission if I don't let you use my private property?" She backpedaled immediately. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm simply pointing out that neighbors should help each other. The signs stay up, Helen. The towing starts tomorrow. Plan accordingly." She hung up without another word. That night, I barely slept. Was I doing the right thing? Was it worth making so many enemies over a parking lot? But then I remembered how Helen had lied to my face, how she'd threatened me. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. I sent an email to all my employees, warning them to arrive early the next day. "Parking situation might get tense," I wrote. "Bring coffee and your patience." I had no idea just how tense things would get. Screams woke me from a deep sleep. I shot up in bed and checked my phone. 6:15 a.m. 3 missed calls from Blue Sky Towing and 1 from my office security system. I threw on yesterday's clothes and raced to my car. As I approached our office building, I could see the chaos from 2 blocks away. 2 tow trucks were already loaded with vehicles. A crowd of about 20 people in bathrobes and pajamas were shouting and blocking a third truck. Someone was filming the whole scene on their phone. I parked on the street and jogged toward the crowd. The lead tow truck driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, looked relieved to see me. "Are you the property owner?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the early morning chill. "These folks are saying they have permission to park here." "I'm the owner," I confirmed, raising my voice to address the crowd. "And no one has permission except my employees and customers." A woman in a pink bathrobe pushed forward. "Helen said we could park here. We have nowhere else to go." "Helen lied to you," I said firmly. "She told you there was an agreement, but there never was one. She made it up." "That's not true," came a sharp voice from behind the crowd. The sea of people parted as Helen strode forward, perfectly dressed in a blue pantsuit, despite the early hour. "This man is being unreasonable. We've had a neighborhood arrangement for years." "Show them the agreement, Helen," I challenged. "Show them the document you claimed existed." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't have it with me right now, because it doesn't exist," I said loudly. "What does exist is proof that the previous owner rejected the HOA's request. I have it in writing, and my lawyer has verified it." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Helen's face flushed red. "You're making a scene," she hissed at me. "No, you caused this scene by lying to your neighbors," I replied. Then I turned to address the crowd again. "I'm sorry you were misled, but this is private property, and these tows are legal. The signs have been up for more than 24 hours, as required by law." An older man in a bathrobe stepped forward. "I'm James Harper, the HOA vice president. May I see this proof you're talking about?" I pulled up the email from my lawyer on my phone and showed him the attached letter from Dr. Johnson, clearly rejecting the HOA's parking request 15 years ago. James's face darkened as he read. "Helen, is this true? Did you know about this letter?" Helen's composure cracked slightly. "That's an old letter. There was a verbal agreement later." "With who?" I challenged. "Dr. Johnson passed away 10 years ago." James turned to Helen. "You told the board we had documentation for this arrangement." As they argued, the tow truck drivers continued their work. One by one, cars were being removed from my lot. A few people quietly slipped away to move their vehicles before they could be towed. "You've declared war on the wrong person." Helen suddenly spun toward me, her voice rising. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of neighbor you are. You'll regret this." That's when I noticed a woman in the crowd holding up her phone, still recording. Helen noticed too, and instantly changed her tone. "What I mean is, we're very disappointed in your lack of community spirit," she amended, smoothing her jacket. But it was too late. Her true colors had been shown. By noon, the parking lot was clear, except for my employees' cars. I'd given the towing company permission to waive the retrieval fee for anyone who came before 9:00 a.m., which had helped calm some of the anger. Still, my email inbox was flooded with messages from HOA residents, some apologetic, others still furious. The most surprising email came from James Harper. "I'd like to meet with you privately to discuss this situation. There have been other issues with Helen's leadership that concern the board. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop midway between our properties." James was straightforward. "I need to apologize on behalf of the HOA," he began. "What Helen did was completely unauthorized. She never brought your parking lot issue to the board for a vote." I sipped my coffee, letting him continue. "This isn't the first time she's overstepped," James explained. "Last year, she hired her brother's landscaping company without board approval. 6 months ago, she threatened the owner of the grocery store when he wouldn't donate to her favorite charity. Why is she still president then?" I asked. James sighed. "She's very good at manipulating people. And frankly, no one wants to challenge her because she can make life difficult." "Like threatening people with her position on the planning commission?" I asked. James's eyebrows shot up. "Did she say that to you? That's a serious ethics violation." I played him the recording of our phone conversation. His face grew grimmer with every word. "Would you be willing to send me that recording?" he asked when it finished. "And possibly attend our emergency board meeting tomorrow night?" The next evening, I found myself in the HOA community center, facing 7 board members and about 50 residents. Helen sat front and center, arms crossed, glaring at me. James opened the meeting. "We've called this emergency session to address serious concerns about recent actions taken by our board president." For the next hour, I watched as years of Helen's misdeeds were brought to light. The unauthorized decision about parking was just the latest in a pattern of abusing her position. When my recording was played, the one where she threatened to block my permits, audible gasps filled the room. Helen tried to defend herself. "He's taking things out of context. I was just trying to protect our community's interests." But the damage was done. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to remove her as president and to begin an ethics investigation regarding her position on the planning commission. As I left the meeting, several residents approached me to apologize personally. One elderly woman squeezed my hand. "Thank you for standing up to her. Some of us have been afraid to for years." The following Monday, my parking lot was blissfully empty except for my employees' cars. I'd received an official letter from the new HOA president, James, apologizing for the incident and confirming that alternative parking arrangements had been made for residents during the remaining paving work. Even better, 3 neighboring business owners contacted me. They'd been dealing with similar issues. Helen had told them they couldn't put up certain signs, or had tried to dictate their business hours by claiming non-existent regulations. Together, we formed a small business association to support each other and to have a unified voice when dealing with the HOA or city issues. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a small article about Helen resigning from the planning commission amid an ethics investigation. I didn't feel as satisfied as I thought I would mostly. I felt relieved that the whole ordeal was over. As I walked through my quiet, orderly parking lot that afternoon, I realized something important. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your own interests. Sometimes it's about creating ripples that help others find their courage too. The next HOA meeting, I was invited as a guest of honor. James presented me with a peace offering, a formal agreement, properly documented and signed by all board members, clarifying the boundaries between our properties and establishing a protocol for any future needs or concerns. "We hope this marks the beginning of a better relationship between neighbors," James said as he handed me the document. I accepted it with a smile. "I'd like that very much."